Pleasant Grove Police.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Can I have an officer come to this address?
And your name?
My name's Darren West. I just found something in my garage. I think it's a miscarriage.
Can you be more specific? What do you mean by a miscarriage you found?
I have no idea. Just please send an officer up here.
It sounds like you may need medical.
It's been wrapped up in a plastic bag and it stinks.
Okay, what is it?
It's a little baby.
The dispatcher came across the radio. She said that the complainant on the phone had just located a miscarriage of some sort in a box. When we pulled up to the home, there was a truck and a trailer parked there, like a utility trailer, and the garage door was open, and it looked as if the family were just doing spring cleaning. A lot of boxes from the garage were out on the driveway. I made contact with Darren and the family. Darren seemed beside himself, kind of like he didn't know really what to do with what was occurring.
See, we've been cleaning the garage.
Okay. Who lives here?
Us three.
1, 2, 3?
It's a double house. The basement and the upstairs are two different.
My two daughters live here.
Darren told us he was in the process of being released from prison. He had his family there helping him prepare to move home. His parents owned the home, and his sister and brother-in-law lived in the basement prior to going to prison. Darren, his wife Megan, and their daughters lived in the home.
And then got a 48-hour pass, and I have...
Here. We went on going to find down. It was in a halfway house. And you've been cleaning out the garage.
I'm trying to get, because I've been gone for so long. And
anyway, there was a box over there. It was all wrapped up. And he says, what is this?
I immediately asked where the box in question was at. I just pointed towards the front of the garage. It was a fruit box, like an apple box. It had electrical tape wrapped around the outside of it. There was actually a box and then a bag close to it. Darren said that bag had been removed from the box. I remember looking inside the bag and noticing the double layers of bags.
The garbage bags were also taped, and so when they had opened up the tape to see what was inside these bags, that's where they found a deceased baby.
It was obvious that it was in a stage of decomposition, but it looked like a human child.
Officers looked at the baby and speculated that it could be full term, but they didn't feel comfortable removing it from the bags and really examining it closely.
So we contacted the medical examiner's office, and they sent out an investigator. Bewilderment, shock. I was speechless. How could you fathom something like that? The big obvious question is what is this child doing here? Who's the mother? Where did it come from?
We didn't know what was going on, and when we seen all the policemen there, we just thought someone was hurt. When they told us that they had found a dead baby in the box, we were in so much shock that we just couldn't believe it.
We shut the scene down. It's not every day you find a deceased infant child wrapped in plastic in a box in your garage. So absolutely, we looked at it as suspicious.
It's a very somber mood. We don't know whether it is a homicide or not, but we're going to investigate it as if it were.
We started going through the garage box by box. Try to see if there's anything that would suggest to us why this child was here. The state of the garage was extremely disheveled, very cluttered. There were boxes from floor to ceiling on all three walls. There was a moment where I paused and looked around the garage and thought, there's hundreds of boxes. How are we going to get through all of these in one day?
Darren relayed to the officers that he called Megan, and Megan had told him that it was his baby that she had after he went to prison back in 2006.
Let's start off with, is it your wife or your girlfriend?
I'm still married to her, but...
Okay, so legally, according to law, it's still your wife.
Yes, sir.
Okay, why don't you tell me what her name is?
Megan Huntsman. What happened is when I went to prison, she stuck around for 2 or 3 years and she took off.
But she is with a boyfriend now
Where is she?
in West Valley somewhere.
We learned Megan and Darren were married for about 21 years and had several children over the course of their marriage. But Megan and Darren lived in the home together for quite a long time.
She just had her on the phone. She said it wasn't his.
And I just said, what the hell is this? What have you done? And I always found something. She goes, oh, you did?
Get that for her.
Don't call the police. Don't call the police. I'm going to get it.
But you said it was yours. Logically, is that true?
I don't know, man. I never knew.
All the neighborhood was confused. It just seemed like a normal family. They kept to themselves mostly. And most of us couldn't believe, is this happening on our street? When it's such a quiet, peaceful family, it was so shocking to all of us. Poor Darren looked awful. Like, I don't believe what I just found. It just broke my heart.
That is not normal. So Officer Abeg called Megan on the phone and spoke with her.
Are you able to help us understand what's going on here? It was a miscarriage.
It was like 9 years ago when he first left.
And how far into your pregnancy were you?
Like 7 months. It was born, stillborn.
Okay. How soon can you come down here? Our detectives need to ask you some follow-up questions so that we can, rule out any kind of foul play.
Okay, there was no foul play.
Okay, listen to me. I need you to stay at your residence. We're going to have a West Valley City officer come pick you up.
We are trying to be sympathetic to her. But as police officers, we're tasked with investigating a crime. And the reality was that she didn't properly dispose of a body. And so were we looking at desecration of a body? We needed to find all the facts.
Thanks for coming down.
Going into the interview, my goal was to understand why a baby was hidden instead of having called the authorities or gone to a doctor or any of those other options that it seems that any of which would have been a better choice.
Well, you know why we're here, what we're here to talk about. Just start at the beginning and tell me what happened.
Well, we were doing drugs a lot. That's what he was in prison for. I got pregnant right before he left, and I really didn't know because I thought it was just stress and stuff.
And he went to prison in 2006?
Yeah.
How far along were you when he
Like
went?
a couple months.
Where did you have the baby?
In the house, in the bathroom.
In the house that you and Darren lived in? Describe to me what happened.
Well, I was having a lot of pain that day. I didn't go to work. My kids were at school. And I went in the bathroom, just sat there and then just pushed really hard. And I was blue and wasn't crying. And I was by myself and I didn't know what to do. And I couldn't get it to cry or anything.
Then what happened?
I got scared and I wrapped it up. Not being smart and calling you guys, I was in shock. It was stupid of me to do it.
What do you mean when you say you wrapped it up?
You remember? It was towels and garlic feathers on me. I put it in the box.
What would you have done differently, looking back?
Called the cops and told them that I had a baby and that I couldn't get to breathe and have the paramedics and stuff come.
She seemed overwhelmed, and I actually perceived the emotions as genuine. Next, I wanted to understand, did she want this baby to live? Did she make life-saving efforts?
So you're on the toilet, you have the baby. You said you tried to get it to breathe. What did you do?
Well, I tried just to clean his mouth out and stuff, and I couldn't get a response at all.
Okay.
I couldn't feel a heartbeat or anything.
Okay. So you clean the baby's mouth out, try to get it to breathe, and then what?
I passed out for a little bit. I think I lost a lot of blood. And then I just remember my kids got home from school and I just told them I wasn't feeling well. And then I cleaned myself up and I went and got a box.
And then, as far as you know, unless someone else moved it, the baby's been in the box in the garage since that first year that Darren went to prison. Okay.
We clean that garage every year, so.
Were you worried somebody else would find it when you guys were cleaning the garage?
Yeah.
And so what would you do to make sure that didn't happen?
I just kind of slide it and sweep around, and then set stuff on it and, so they knew that part was already clean and stuff.
My perception was that this very well may just be a stillbirth and a terrible series of decisions. Her husband's in prison, she's alone, she has this baby at home, she's a single mother of 3, and she saw it as the only way to handle the situation. But at the same time, she wasn't making a lot of eye contact, and I did feel like she was withholding information and not being completely honest with me, and I didn't know why.
Because I was so scared, I don't know what I was thinking. I have no idea.
Do you remember if the baby was a boy or a girl? So, did anyone else know that you were pregnant?
No. I don't show at all.
Did you tell Darren?
No, I never told anyone.
Okay. Had you ever had any stillborn babies prior to that?
Miscarriages.
And on these miscarriages, did they all happen at home?
One happened at home.
Does your family have a history of these problems?
The miscarriages? Yeah. My grandma had a lot. I had an aunt that had a stillborn.
So that there is
Yeah.
a lot of this in your family. All right. Is there anything else that you think I should have asked you that I haven't asked you?
No, I don't think so.
Is there anything else that you want me to know?
No.
And we really want the right thing for this baby. Proper burial and closure for you and for your family. Your husband went to prison, you're raising the kids on your own, and you're overwhelmed, and I can understand that. I mean, Darren just found out that he had another kid that he didn't know about, so.
I totally understand that.
What do you think proper closure looks like? Anything else?
Me going to jail.
Well, it's clear that we think you should go to jail for this, that you recognize you've done something wrong. We haven't made any decisions like that. We're still just trying to put the story together at this point.
I was trying to understand her mindset. So for her to say proper closure is burial and me going to jail, that was the first indicator that her mindset could have been criminal.
I remember there being some sort of form of tape over it, and then as we opened it up, there's heavy padding and packaging, more plastic wrap. As we got deeper into that box, we did ultimately find a second child. I felt angry, and I remember thinking, what in the actual hell is going on?
The manner in which the babies were packaged created some suspicion that this might be more than just a stillborn baby. Concern was she was concealing a guilty conscience, and that's why she went to the extent that she did to conceal those babies and their location.
Yep.
There was a knock at the door, and it was an investigator who asked me to come out of the room. That investigator told me that while conducting the search warrant at the house that they had found a second baby. So when I came back into the room, I took a huge sigh recognizing that if I showed emotion or judgment, it could shut Megan down. I wanted to ensure that she didn't feel like I was being critical or judgmental.
We have investigators in the house right now. They found a second baby. Will you please tell me about that?
Hey, there's more. Hey, I'm sorry. I have hit every one of them, and he had to have known I was pregnant through most of them.
There's others? How many?
I'm not even sure. I was on so many drugs and stuff during it all, I can't even remember.
When?
All through the years.
I didn't think she was telling the truth about not being able to remember, but I continued a softer approach. I had to maintain this relationship of trust and not come across as skeptical.
If it's easier for you to remember, if we want to start after you had your first child, when you had the first miscarriage.
One, right after we moved in. I can't even remember. I remember when I had in the tub. They were all stillborn. Every one of them.
Were they full term?
No, they were without me.
Okay, so how many do you think will we find in the garage?
4.
You moved into the house in 2001.
No.
I'm sorry, that's when his mom said it was built.
We moved in that house in 96.
And so the first baby that was born in the house would have been in 1996, shortly after you moved in?
Yeah.
Okay. The last one was right after he went to prison. Did you put all 4 in the garage?
Yeah.
Did you keep them in the same place in the garage? What did you...
It was covered.
Okay. And so all 4 boxes are in the same place? Okay. Well, I just want to be able to relay to the detectives what they're going to find. And so all 4
yes.
children are in the cabinet in the garage?
Yes.
Okay. Why didn't you call for help?
I'm afraid of people knowing I'm pregnant.
I mean, this is Utah. It's not common for people to have a lot of kids.
Oh, because I was young. Because I was so young.
Several years later, though, when this happened, I mean, you're not so young.
I know. But like I said, the drugs, they mess with you. Bad.
So you're telling me that because you were on drugs, you weren't making good decisions?
Yeah, exactly.
Does it feel better to tell the truth?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, just a minute.
We had information come into us that there were a total of 4 children in that garage, which we had not found yet. We knew that this was a bigger scale investigation than we initially thought. We had upwards of probably 20 or 30 people at the house, going through every nook and cranny, closet, attic, basement, anywhere you could think of to hide anything. Something like this is not something you want to make a mistake on.
All right, we're almost done. We've talked about a lot. I don't know yet. We haven't made those decisions because we're doing the search warrant still. And because of the seriousness of this, they are also going to obtain a search warrant for your house in West Valley. Is there anything at that house that we need to know about before we go up there?
For me, no. All that's up there is my clothes.
Okay.
Most people that I interrogate, I have probable cause that they've committed a crime, or I know a lot of the answers. And in this case, I still wasn't certain whether everything she was telling me was true. It was a delicate balance between trying to recognize when she was withholding information and whether that was intentional or a result of drug use, of passage of time, possibly mental illnesses.
So have the babies been in the garage the whole time?
I never moved them or anything. But yeah, they've been in the garage the whole time.
So
Yeah.
we're talking 8 years ago.
Yes.
I mean, you told me earlier that you put the boxes with the babies in them in the cabinet.
Yeah.
Did you ever take them out of that cabinet?
No.
I imagine in the last 9 years, stuff's been in and out of that
I
garbage.
didn't think so because I was just there a month or so ago getting my bed and stuff out of there and I seen it sitting there.
Right. And so did anyone in the world know that that baby was in the garage? Okay.
So
Well, they're saying one of the boxes was on a stack of shelves next to the cabinet. Why would it be there?
unless I moved it or something, but it's not thinking.
Do you know when that might have been?
Before I left, if I did. I mean, I haven't been in that house. I've only once since I moved out.
At this point, because of the atmosphere in the room or the way that she was talking to me, I suspected they were all miscarriages or that they were all stillborn. I'm now thinking not only has she hidden these babies, but she hid the fact that they were born. That was the first moment that I felt that she may have ended these babies' lives. I do believe that having spent 90 minutes now establishing this trust and information eliciting, I continued that pattern and went for more details.
I want to make sure that there's no more weight on your shoulders. Okay. When you have these babies,
Yes.
you said after they were born and they were blue and you try to get them to breathe. What would you do to try to get them to breathe?
Sometimes I was so scared I'd, you know.
I don't know. I'm sorry.
Sorry, like shake them, sorry.
Mhm.
Like that.
Did you have like the suction cup they used to clean out their mouths?
No, I just use my finger and stuff.
You described you had the one in the tub, that you'd fill the tub and had.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah.
Was that baby alive when it was born?
I think it was. For a short time.
What happened?
Well, you'd think if I had a baby in the house, it just cried, so it would hit, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, you say you think it was for a short time. What was it moving? Did it start to breathe?
No, it wasn't breathing. I could see a little heartbeat and then it stopped.
Okay. For about how long?
Not very long at all.
Okay.
It didn't make sense. There was help available that she didn't reach out to. If she wanted these babies to live, any other choice would have been better.
The one that you had when he was in prison, that you were on the toilet, was that one alive when it was born? Okay. Where were the other two born?
One on the bed. And the other in the bathroom.
Okay. The one on the bed when it was born. Do you think it might have been alive for a short time as well?
It might have.
I've never asked somebody if they've killed somebody before. I took a several second pause. I knew that this was a make or break question. And that hesitation was actually me trying to decide if it was the right moment to ask it.
Did you kill the baby after it was born? What we need is the truth.
I did one of them.
Which one?
Can't remember. No, I was just so scared. I was so on drugs so bad I choked him.
How did you choke it?
Yeah.
Do you think all four of these babies were alive when they were born?
I'm pretty sure one of them wasn't.
And did you choke the others?
Yes, I did.
And you put them in a towel, put them in garbage bags, and then put them in a box and put it in the garage. So one was dead when it was born, and the other three you choked. why did you choke him?
I don't know. Scared, I was in shock.
Have you ever told anyone this?
No, I've never told us all.
So when we run DNA tests, will they all be Darren's?
Yes, they will.
Okay. Is there anything else we need to know about?
No.
All right.
I took a break because of the emotions that I was feeling. I was overwhelmed by the fact that a woman did something so unthinkable to her newborn babies. Once I'm out of her sight, my hands went to my knees, and I had to take several breaths to really process, holy she had killed these babies.
This was probably one of the longest days in my career. It was emotionally straining, physically exhausting, and the feeling in the air was dread, but also determination to find out what in the hell actually had happened. Eventually, we found baby number 3. Baby number 3 was packaged a lot more tightly than the others. It was several layers worth of duct tape. Once we got the box open, there was again the plastic vinyl bag, and my heart just sunk. And I thought, dear God, please no, not another one.
I'm told that there is a 5th baby found at the home. Now it's becoming almost exhausting. How many could there be? And what is going on?
All right, Megan, I'm really happy with how far you've come, but I'm concerned that you haven't told me everything. How many do you think there possibly could be?
Honestly, I don't know how many. 4 I can think of, but I don't.
Okay. They are up to 5. And so now that there's 5, are you still only certain that one of them was dead when it was born? And so the other 4 were alive?
There could be more. Like I said, I can't remember a damn thing.
How many do you think there would be?
I'd say 8 or 9.
When they're done searching the garage, they are going to search the rest of the house. Will they find any more?
No.
Okay. So there could be 8 or 9?
Yeah, there could be. But I know there's no more than that. And I know there's none in the house. I mean, you'd smell them if they were in the house.
Right. Did the smell from the garage ever come in the house?
No.
It would just be out in the garage.
People said it was some smell, you know, like in the heat of the summer. We had cats and stuff, and you know, and I think it was always just blamed on that.
They would just leave it open?
Mm-hmm.
And you're saying Darren never knew?
No, and I told you, only me. I've kept this to myself for 18 years.
So I'm the only person that you've ever told?
Yes.
As I was talking to Megan, I'm starting to wonder, okay, well, how much Darren knew? I was aware that they didn't have a chance to get their story straight. And so I was interested in what she did feel that his knowledge and or culpability may or may not be.
When I talked to you earlier, you mentioned that Darren should have known. What do you mean by that? Did you tell her?
No. I don't know why. I think my mind was just so out of it. You know, I didn't even, all I was focused on was the next fix. But how can you not know? How can you sleep with someone every night and not know that?
When we're talking about Darren knowing that you were pregnant because he's in your bed, those are miscarriages. And so did you just tell him that you miscarried?
Yeah.
Okay. And so when you told him that it was a miscarriage, he never asked what he did with the miscarriage? Okay.
I didn't believe that Darren just happened to find this baby and had no other knowledge of how or where it could have come from. I'm under the suspicion that he knew more than even what Megan knew he knew.
It was hard to grasp and to fathom. I just remembered just being in shock that he kept finding babies. 6 and then finally 7, and it was horrific.
Total of 7 children had been found in the garage. We went to every exhaustive measure trying to determine if there were more than just the 7 children we found. We did a search at her home in West Valley. We used cadaver dogs at multiple locations, and ultimately we didn't find anything more than the 7 found in her garage.
So I have to ask, about the stuff that they're finding. They're up to 7.
Like I said, they're all in the garage.
And you said you were certain that only one was stillborn and that you strangled the rest.
Yes.
Well, I think I'm ready to take you upstairs then. And we're going to put you in a holding cell while we finish processing the scene. Okay?
Megan was exhausted. She hadn't accepted food or water all day, and we had made our case. So at that point, I do inform her that she's going to jail for murder.
She was only charged with 6 because she maintained that one of the babies was stillborn.
I really wanted to understand how much Darren knew. Was he complicit, and did he tell her to do it? Did he tell her to get rid of him? Or was he so aloof and disconnected that it was convenient that they were gone?
I'm just taking damn extra much, so I'm trying to talk to everybody, make sure I know that it's been a horrible day for a lot of you. So,
in talking with Darren, I had to be aware of the fact that having the criminal history that he did, if he felt that I was trying to implicate him, that he would immediately request counsel. So I was very careful because I wanted to earn his trust.
You're not in trouble right now. I'm just trying to understand everything that's happened. So she's saying that baby was a miscarriage after he went in prison.
That's what she told me. Is that what she's still saying?
Yes. We did get a search warrant in the house, and there's more than one. And so, how many times was your wife pregnant?
I have 3 daughters, and I know of one other time that she had a miscarriage. I never even knew she was pregnant with 2 of my daughters until she was like 4 or 5 months along. And then she told me, I don't know, sir.
There's...
How many was there?
There was 7.
You were kidding me.
I'm not. She said that the first one was shortly after you moved into the house.
Oh my God.
And that the last one, she was pregnant by you before you went to prison.
Wait, so she says they're all mine?
That's what she says. And that's why I'm glad you're here, because I would have thought that if she was pregnant 7 times in the 10-year period that you lived in that house, that surely you would have known.
Holy
His reaction was very emotional. His head went in his hands, and I actually perceived that as genuine, that he was not aware that there was 7. However, I didn't believe that he just happened to find this baby and had no other knowledge of how or where it could have come from.
You said you knew that she was pregnant once. Are you talking about one other time than the miscarriage, or are you talking about something else?
That's the only time I know. I was so messed up on freaking drugs, and I don't know what was going on.
I can tell that you know about more than what you're telling me. Megan hid pregnancies from everybody until shortly before she had kids. But you're saying that she told you when she was 4 months along. I believe that you knew about these pregnancies.
I swear to God, I never knew about all these pregnancies.
What's happened here is tragic. But I don't think that you killed these babies and hid them. I think that you were married to a woman who was going to do it her way, and then you were done fighting with her, and so you allowed her to make these decisions. Is that what happened?
I never would think that she would put babies in a box and freaking...
So what did you think she was doing with these pregnancies?
I didn't realize she was pregnant 7 freaking times.
I'm a married man. You know your wife's pregnant. And so she's telling me that the only one that you weren't around for is when you went to prison.
Honest to God, I didn't know that there were 7 babies in my garage.
I know.
I never knew there was 1 in there. Do you think I would have go out and clean the garage and then, you know what I mean?
I understand where you're coming from. I'm not saying you knew they were in the garage, but I'm saying you had to know that they were brought into the world. Your wife has admitted to some crimes, to some horrible things. She admits that she killed some of them after they were born. Like I said, she's being completely honest. And I really wish you were too.
What do you want me to say? I didn't know she was killing kids, and I didn't know she was put in boxes. I don't know how they do it. I don't know how she could give birth and then... I don't know.
Were you there when any of these were born?
No, sir. No, sir. I swear.
What we want to do is we want to do what's right. We want to have closure for these children. We want to have closure for your kids that are alive. For these babies' grandparents. I mean, these babies were in a garage for years.
I never knew that, though. I never knew that.
As officers, death notifications are very difficult, and this was one that I didn't really view it as a death notification until I had done it. And I actually kind of felt badly that that's how Darren found out that he had fathered 7 other children that he didn't even know about.
I don't want to say nothing else. This is looking bad. I had no idea that she was killing kids and putting them in boxes. I swear to God.
Okay.
But I want an attorney, though. Wouldn't you?
I can't give you that advice. I'm not in your situation, and I don't think I ever will be.
No, you won't.
So. Okay. All right, hold on just a second. We'll get you upstairs in just a minute.
My perspective of Darren at that point was that I truly didn't know how much more he knew. But there was no evidence that Darren helped Megan. Also, considering the fact that if he knew that there were bodies in this garage, he wouldn't be cleaning his garage on a 48-hour pass. So he was released. We sent all of the evidence that would preserve a fingerprint, tape, plastic bags, things from the boxes that may have DNA on it. And the FBI did analyze all of that for us. Every fingerprint that the FBI found was Megan's.
Ultimately, Darren was cleared of any involvement in the case.
Our goal from the beginning of this was to ensure justice for these babies.
And tonight, justice for 6 babies killed right after birth by their own mother as she pleads guilty to 6 counts of murder.
And the judge gave her the maximum sentence that could keep her locked up for the rest of her life.
Megan, having admitted to killing all but one, she was sentenced to 6 5-to-lifes to be served consecutively. She's going to prison for the rest of her life.
Megan had a family that she was raising. But on the flip side of that coin, she also had 7 dead children in her garage that she had murdered. I don't know what her motive was. I don't care what her motive was. But the fact of the matter is she did it, and that was unfathomable to me.
Neighbors tonight are in absolute shock.
I mean, I just can't even believe that even Megan would be capable of such a thing.
All of us were so surprised to find out that she had had 7 pregnancies and that none of us knew. That was a shock in itself.
This whole event was very traumatic for our community. Something snapped in her brain. I still haven't come to terms with it.
It was heartbreaking to me because, our church is so based on family. Our belief is families are forever. This is our nice little Pleasant Grove. How could this happen in this community?
At the end of the day, there are things that can never be fully explained in this case.
A few years later, they did have a memorial for the babies. Darren's parents did decide to give all the babies a name, which was great, and I'm glad they done that.
The night London forgot how to sleep began with a sound no one could place. Not a scream, not a crash, just a short, sharp noise swallowed by the rain somewhere off Holloway Road, the kind of sound that disappears the moment you decide it might matter. By morning, the city would wake to headlines screaming cold case, young woman vanished, last seen walking home, but at that exact moment, just after midnight in the spring of 2003, London was still breathing normally, buses still hissing at stops, streetlights still humming, unaware that something had slipped out of alignment. A single figure had stepped into the dark and never properly returned, and the absence she left behind would become louder than any scream ever could. Her name was Eleanor Wright, 26 years old, a junior archivist at a small legal firm near Gray's Inn. Not famous, not powerful, the kind of person the city usually absorbs without noticing. She rented a narrow flat on the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian house, shared the hallway with strangers whose names she barely knew, drank instant coffee in the mornings, and phoned her mother every Sunday without fail. On the night she disappeared, she left a friend's birthday gathering early, apologizing, smiling, saying she had an early meeting. Witnesses would later remember that detail clearly because it was ordinary. Nothing about Eleanor's last confirmed movements suggested danger. No arguments. No tears. No dramatic exit. Just a woman buttoning her coat and stepping into a London night she had walked through hundreds of times before. The route home was simple. A 15-minute walk. Down a main road, past a late-night off-license glowing like a fish tank, across a small pedestrian cut-through locals used as a shortcut, then left onto her street. CCTV cameras covered parts of it, but not all. London in 2003 was watched, but not completely. She appeared on one camera at 12:17 a.m., walking briskly, shoulder bag hanging from her right arm. That image would later be printed, enlarged, stared at until the pixels broke apart. Eleanor in mid-step, unaware she was about to become a reference point in time, last known sighting. She never arrived home. By morning, her absence was noticed not by police, but by silence. An unanswered phone. An untouched voicemail. A landlord annoyed she hadn't paid rent early as usual. By afternoon, worry hardened into something colder. Her mother called hospitals. Friends checked pubs. Someone suggested she might have stayed over, forgotten to say. But as the hours passed, that explanation rotted. Eleanor Wright did not vanish casually. She planned. She informed. She left notes. By nightfall, the word missing was spoken out loud, and once spoken, it refused to be taken back. Police began where they always begin, the flat. Nothing broken. No signs of struggle. Bed neatly made. Passport still in a drawer. Laptop on the desk, closed, battery dead. Her mobile phone was not there. That detail tightened the room. People forget wallets. People forget keys. They rarely forget phones. On the street below, neighbors were questioned. Most remembered nothing. A man on the first floor mentioned footsteps around 1 in the morning, but admitted he heard footsteps every night. A woman across the hall recalled voices, maybe laughter, maybe the television. London apartments bleed sound. Memory blurs. Nothing stuck. The shortcut alley became the focal point. A narrow passage between brick walls, damp with moss, smelling of old rain and cigarettes. No cameras. No witnesses who could say with certainty they saw Eleanor enter or leave it. Police walked it again and again, measuring distances, imagining angles. It was the kind of place everyone used and no one watched. Perfectly ordinary. Perfectly invisible. Officers found nothing at first. Then, 2 days later, a cleaner reported a single shoe tucked behind a skip near the alley's exit. A black flat. Scuffed toe. Eleanor's size. That shoe changed the temperature of the investigation. It introduced violence without showing it. Shoes don't come off by accident. Not there. Not like that. The alley was sealed. Forensic teams combed every inch, lifting debris, scraping walls. They found trace fibers. They found cigarette butts. They found DNA belonging to people who had nothing to do with Eleanor Wright and everything to do with London being London. No blood. No weapon. No body. Just absence, sharpened by that one discarded object. The media arrived with cameras and adjectives. Bright young professional. Vanished without trace. Family in agony. Eleanor's photograph appeared everywhere, her face flattened into ink and pixels. Strangers began to recognize her, or thought they did. Tips poured in. Sightings from Manchester. From Brighton. From Paris. Each one followed. Each one collapsed. Someone claimed she'd joined a cult. Someone said she'd been seen arguing with a man near the alley. The man was found. He had an alibi, shaky but sufficient. Another lead evaporated. Detectives built timelines, pinning notes to boards, drawing lines between places and people. They learned Eleanor had no known enemies. No ex-boyfriend lurking in the shadows. No deaths. No secret double life waiting to be exposed. Her emails were polite. Her browsing history boring. Her bank account steady. If she had been targeted, it wasn't personal. That realization frightened investigators more than any obvious suspect would have. Crimes without motive sprawl. They don't point neatly back at a single angry face. Weeks passed. Posters peeled in the rain. The shoe remained the most tangible piece of Eleanor left in the world. Police quietly began to prepare her family for the worst without saying the word dead. Then, 6 weeks after her disappearance, the River Lea gave something back. A body caught against debris near a bend, waterlogged, unrecognizable at first glance. Identification took days. Dental records confirmed what everyone had been avoiding. Eleanor Wright had not left London. London had swallowed her. The autopsy revealed little comfort. Cause of death undetermined, likely drowning. No clear signs of sexual assault. No obvious defensive wounds. Time in the water had erased too much. Whatever happened between the alley and the river had been efficient, controlled, and left minimal trace. Detectives were left holding questions with no sharp edges. How did she get from her route to the river? Why there? Who moved her? Or did she walk part of the way herself under threat, fear compressing her choices? Attention shifted outward. CCTV was re-examined. Hundreds of hours reviewed. Faces slowed, zoomed, compared. One camera, positioned near a petrol station several streets away, showed a woman resembling Eleanor walking with a man around 12:29 a.m. The image was grainy, the man's face indistinct. They appeared calm. No dragging. No struggle. Just two figures moving together. Police released stills. The public leaned in. The man became the mystery companion. Dozens of men were identified, questioned, eliminated. None matched conclusively. The footage remained a maybe, a question mark flickering on a screen. As months turned into a year, the case cooled. Officers were reassigned. Files thickened. Eleanor's parents aged visibly in interviews, grief pulling them downward frame by frame. The alley returned to normal use. New cigarette butts replaced the old. The shoe sat in an evidence locker, tagged, catalogued, waiting. London moved on because London always does. But somewhere within the paperwork, within the overlooked details, the case did not sleep. It waited. What unsettled the detectives who couldn't let it go was not what they didn't have, but what they did. Eleanor's disappearance did not fit the patterns they knew. It wasn't random enough for a spontaneous street attack. It wasn't personal enough for a domestic killing. The absence of struggle suggested compliance, at least initially. Someone had approached her without raising alarm. Someone she did not immediately fear. Someone who belonged in that space, at that hour, without drawing attention. Years later, when the term cold case was officially stamped onto Eleanor Wright's file, it felt less like a conclusion and more like a mislabel. Cold implied stillness. This case had never stopped moving. It drifted through departments, through conversations, through the quiet thoughts of detectives who found themselves staring at alleyways and wondering who else had walked them unseen. The city had changed since 2003. Cameras multiplied. Streets brightened. But the past remained dim, and somewhere in that dimness, a man had walked alongside Eleanor Wright, close enough to share a frame, close enough to vanish with her into history, hiding not in shadows, but in plain sight. Waiting for the moment when someone would finally look at what had been there all along. Time did not freeze after Eleanor Wright was pulled from the river. It thinned, stretched, became something detectives dipped their hands into and came back with nothing but cold. The official announcement came in careful language, designed to sound decisive while admitting very little. The investigation remained active. No suspects had been charged. The public heard closure where there was none. Inside the file, uncertainty festered. Eleanor's death was now a fact, but the path to it was still a void, and voids have a way of drawing people in until they lose their footing. The alleyway was reopened, but it never truly returned to normal. Residents said it felt narrower, as if the walls had leaned inward to listen. Officers revisited it at different times of day, standing where Eleanor might have stood, watching how people moved through it. Most walked quickly. Some hesitated. A few paused to light cigarettes. Everyone behaved differently under the same streetlight. That mattered. Behavior, detectives knew, was the only thing that separated the invisible from the seen. A second pass through Eleanor's life began, slower and more invasive. Every phone call she made in the weeks before her death was logged. Every email reread. Her colleagues were interviewed again, this time with sharper questions. Who walked her to the tube sometimes? Who lingered at her desk? Who knew her routines? The answers were dull, predictable. Eleanor was liked, respected, forgettable in the way that made her safe. Or so it seemed. Then there was the phone. It surfaced 6 months after her death, not in the river, not in the alley, but in a charity shop bin 3 miles away. An employee found it while sorting donations, its casing scratched, the screen cracked but intact. The SIM card was still inside. Police confirmed the serial number within hours. Eleanor's phone had been powered off since the night she disappeared. No outgoing calls. No messages sent. Whoever discarded it had done so deliberately, choosing a place where it would blend into the noise of the city's constant shedding of objects. The phone reignited everything. Forensics pulled data the public assumed would be gone. Location pings. Partial logs. The last signal was not from Eleanor's street or the alley. It was from a cluster of towers near an industrial stretch by the canal, close to where her body was eventually found. That meant movement. That meant transport. Someone had taken her there, or she had been forced to go, her phone traveling with her like a silent witness. Detectives returned to the CCTV footage with new coordinates in mind. Cameras near the canal were fewer, older, often broken. One grainy clip showed a vehicle slowing near a service road at 12:46 a.m. The angle was wrong. The plate unreadable. The model indistinct. But there was something else. A pedestrian walking past the vehicle, glancing inside, then continuing without hesitation. Police froze the frame. Enhanced it. The pedestrian was a man in his 30s, wearing a dark jacket, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged there. He was never identified. The theory of a random abduction began to weaken. Random did not explain the calmness. Random did not explain the lack of witnesses. Someone had known where to stop, where to turn, where cameras thinned. Someone had known the canal roads well enough to use them without attracting attention. The circle of potential suspects tightened around people who lived nearby, worked late, moved through those spaces at odd hours. One name surfaced quietly during this phase, not from a tip, not from a witness, but from a spreadsheet. A man named Martin Hale, 38. Maintenance supervisor for a property management company responsible for several buildings along Eleanor's route. His job required late-night callouts. Broken locks. Alarm faults. He knew alleys, service roads, shortcuts. He appeared in multiple CCTV frames that night, not with Eleanor, but within the same time window, moving between sites. He had an alibi of sorts, work logs signed off by his own company. Detectives noted him and moved on. Cold cases don't go cold all at once. They cool in layers. First the urgency fades, then the resources, then the belief. By 2006, Eleanor Wright's file was thick but static. New leads were rare. Old ones were recycled. Her parents kept a box of documents under their bed, refusing to accept the word unsolved as final. Each anniversary brought a small wave of attention, then silence again. It was a junior analyst, years later, who reopened the spreadsheet. She wasn't looking for Eleanor. She was auditing old CCTV logs as part of a broader review of unsolved cases along the canal. Patterns, her supervisor said. See if anything jumps out. She cross-referenced names of people caught on camera near multiple crime scenes across different years. Most repeats were delivery drivers, security guards, maintenance workers, people paid to be everywhere. But one name appeared more than it should have. Martin Hale. He appeared near a 1999 assault, near a 2001 attempted abduction, near Eleanor's case in 2003. Never charged, never accused, always peripheral, always explainable. His job placed him there. That was the point. His presence never raised alarms because it made sense. The analyst flagged the pattern. It traveled up the chain slowly, meeting skepticism at every desk. Correlation wasn't causation. Maintenance supervisors were everywhere. London ran on them. But when detectives pulled Hale's file again, older now, heavier with context, small details began to feel heavier than they had before. His phone records from 2003 showed brief outages that aligned uncomfortably well with Eleanor's last known movements. Not proof. Not even close. But no longer ignorable. They spoke to him again, years after the fact. Hale was calm, cooperative. He remembered Eleanor's building vaguely. Remembered the night vaguely. Vague was his default. He had aged into the role of someone no one questioned. His answers slid off interviews like water. When asked about the canal roads, he smiled and said he'd worked there for years. When asked about the phone found in the charity bin, he shrugged. London was full of bins. No charges followed. The case remained officially unsolved. But inside the department, a shift occurred. The narrative changed quietly. Eleanor Wright was no longer framed as a victim of chance. She was reframed as someone who crossed paths with a man whose life intersected too neatly with too many crimes. A man who did not hide in darkness, but in routine. In paperwork. In trust. The file was moved from the shelf to the desk again. Notes were added. Old witness statements were reread with new emphasis. The pedestrian near the canal. The calmness of the CCTV companion. The shoe placed carefully behind the skip. None of it screamed panic. It whispered familiarity. Control. Someone who knew how not to leave marks. The public never heard most of this. What they heard were the same tired lines about ongoing investigations and appeals for information. But within the quiet rooms where cold cases are kept alive by stubborn people, Eleanor Wright's name began to circulate again, not as a tragedy to be mourned, but as a question that might still have an answer. And the most unsettling part was not the possibility that the answer existed, but that it had been present from the beginning, walking through secured doors, signing work logs, nodding to cameras, hiding not in the shadows of London's alleys, but in the plain. Well-lit spaces everyone assumed were safe. By the time Eleanor Wright's name resurfaced in internal briefings, London had taught itself to forget her face. New scandals had arrived. New missing posters had peeled off new walls. The city's memory refreshed itself like a screen, wiping away the old images to make room for the next shock. But inside the cold case unit, forgetting was a luxury no one was allowed. Eleanor's file sat open again, its pages now read with a different muscle, not grief, not urgency, but suspicion sharpened by hindsight. Every line was no longer what it said, but what it avoided saying. Detectives began where they had once skimmed. Martin Hale's work logs. Time-stamped, signed, unremarkable. Too unremarkable. On the night Eleanor vanished, Hale had been assigned to 3 properties, all within a loose corridor stretching from Holloway Road toward the canal. He arrived early at one. Left late at another. The gaps between visits were explained away as travel time. No one had ever asked why his routes curved the way they did, why his movements formed a shape that seemed to orbit Eleanor's last known path without ever colliding with it on paper. They mapped it again, this time without assuming innocence. The lines tightened. The margins shrank. What had once looked like coincidence now felt choreographed. Hale had keys. Not master keys to the city, but something close. Access to basements, side doors, service entrances. Places without cameras, or with cameras everyone assumed were broken. He wore a uniform that made him invisible. If someone saw him talking to Eleanor near her building, it would register as maintenance, not danger. Authority without badges. Permission without paperwork. That was the shape of it. Not force. Not chaos. Just the quiet pressure of someone who belonged. Old witness statements were pulled out of storage. One, long dismissed, came from a woman who lived above the alley. She had reported seeing Eleanor speaking to a man briefly near the entrance. She couldn't hear the words. She remembered the man because he gestured with confidence, pointing as if explaining something. She assumed he was giving directions or checking a lock. The description was vague. Dark jacket. Average height. The kind of man half of London could become at night. The statement had been buried under louder, more dramatic claims. Now it was reread in silence. The CCTV still of Eleanor with the unidentified man was enhanced again, using software that didn't exist in 2003. The image sharpened incrementally, not enough to reveal a face, but enough to show posture. The man walked half a step ahead of her. Not dragging. Not following. Leading. That detail stuck. People in danger walk differently. They lag. They resist. Eleanor's stride matched his. That didn't mean consent. It meant trust, or at least the illusion of it. Hale denied ever meeting her. Denied walking with her. Denied anything that could be pinned to a time or place. But denial was easy when the years had eroded certainty. Memories frayed. Alibis softened. He was protected by the fog of time as much as by his own carefulness. Detectives tried another angle. Pattern behavior. They reviewed Hale's employment history. He had changed companies often, always within the same sector, always lateral moves. No promotions. No demotions. Just movement. Each change coincided with a complaint that went nowhere. An argument with a tenant. An allegation of rudeness. Once, a young woman claimed he had entered her flat without proper notice. He apologized. The company smoothed it over. Nothing that survived scrutiny. Nothing that would justify alarm. But the shape repeated. Proximity. Access. Discomfort dismissed as misunderstanding. The cold case unit requested a covert review of Hale's more recent activities. Surveillance, limited and quiet. He lived alone. No criminal record. No obvious vices. He worked. He ate. He slept. He blended. The most disturbing thing about him was how ordinary he remained under scrutiny. Monsters, detectives knew, were easier. They leaked. They slipped. Hale did not. Pressure mounted internally. Some officers believed they were chasing a ghost built from coincidence and regret. Others felt the familiar tightening in their gut that came when a story finally began to align. The argument was never about evidence. It was about threshold. How much alignment was enough to justify crossing the line from interest to accusation? Then came the call no one expected. A woman in her 40s contacted the police after seeing a documentary clip about Eleanor's case. Her voice shook, but her memory did not. She said she had known Martin Hale years ago. Briefly. In passing. He had worked on her building in 2004. She remembered him because he had frightened her without doing anything overtly frightening. He had known her schedule. Mentioned details she had never shared. Asked questions framed as concern. She had brushed it off. Then, months later, another woman in the building reported being followed. The police were called. Nothing came of it. Hale transferred to another company shortly after. Her statement alone meant little, but it cracked something open. Detectives appealed quietly for anyone else who had interacted with Hale to come forward. They did not use Eleanor's name. They did not make headlines. They waited. 2 more women responded. Different years. Different buildings. Similar feelings. Being watched. Being guided into spaces that felt suddenly wrong. One described being walked toward a service corridor under the pretense of a repair. She refused. Hale laughed it off. No crime. No report. Just discomfort that lingered long enough to resurface years later when a face on a screen unlocked it. Still, nothing that could hold in court. Nothing that could resurrect Eleanor in a way the law recognized. The river remained silent. Forensic retesting of Eleanor's clothing yielded nothing new. The shoe, the phone, the footage all sat within reach but out of grasp. The case hovered in that unbearable middle ground where belief grows faster than proof. Detectives began to understand the real cruelty of cold cases, not the lack of answers, but the abundance of almosts. Hale was interviewed again, this time under a different tone. Firmer. Less polite. He noticed. His answers tightened. He corrected questions before they were finished. He smiled less. When shown the enhanced still, he leaned back and said it could be anyone. When asked about the women who felt uncomfortable around him, he scoffed and said people misread intentions all the time. He was careful to sound reasonable. Reasonable men were rarely accused. That was another thing he understood. The interview ended without arrest. Again. But something had shifted outside the room. The story of Eleanor Wright was no longer about what happened to her. It was about how someone could move through London for decades, intersecting with harm without ever being named as its source. It was about how trust, once granted automatically, could be weaponized. About how the most dangerous place to hide was not in the dark, but in the open, under the protection of routine and plausible explanation. As the detectives filed their notes, one of them paused over the timeline pinned to the wall. Eleanor leaving the party. Eleanor on camera. Eleanor with the man. The alley. The shoe. The canal. The phone in the bin. Each step was now shadowed by a presence that had always been there, blurred into the background of the city. Whether or not Martin Hale could ever be charged, one truth had hardened beyond debate. Eleanor Wright had not disappeared into chaos. She had been guided, calmly and deliberately, by someone who knew exactly how to walk beside her without being seen, and London, with all its lights and cameras and witnesses, had watched them pass and assumed nothing was wrong. The problem with believing you found the answer is that the world immediately demands proof, and proof does not care about patterns or instincts or the quiet certainty that settles in a detective's bones after too many sleepless nights. Proof wants timestamps that don't blur, witnesses who don't hesitate, and motives that can be explained in a sentence without sounding like fiction. Eleanor Wright's case, now orbiting the name Martin Hale, had everything except the one thing the law required. And so the investigation pivoted again, not forward, not backward, but inward, peeling at the smallest layers, hoping one of them would finally bleed. They started with the night itself, compressing it until it could barely breathe. 12 minutes between Eleanor leaving the party and appearing on camera. Another 12 before the image of her with the unidentified man. Less than 20 minutes between that and the last signal from her phone near the canal. The timeline was tight. No room for wandering. No room for indecision. Whatever happened, happened fast. That ruled out a spontaneous encounter with a stranger who needed time to persuade, threaten, or improvise. Speed suggested preparation. Familiarity. A plan that could be executed in motion. Hale's work vehicle from 2003 became an obsession. A white van, standard issue, long since sold, its registration recycled back into the system. But records remained. Fuel receipts. Maintenance logs. On the night Eleanor disappeared, the van had been refueled unusually late at a station that sat like a hinge between her route and the canal. CCTV from the station was gone, tapes reused, the past erased by routine. But the receipt timestamp matched the window. Another almost. Another near miss that left a mark but no wound. Detectives reconstructed possible routes, driving them at night, stopping where a van could pull over without notice, without blocking traffic, without being remembered. London offered too many options. That was its gift to those who knew how to use it. Service roads, loading bays, dead ends designed to look accidental. Places where a uniform and a van erase suspicion. Eleanor could have been approached with a simple sentence. A warning about a gas leak. A question about access. A request that sounded like responsibility, not danger. Once she stepped closer, the city would do the rest. They searched for the moment control might have shifted. The alley. The skip. The shoe. Not torn off, but placed. That detail gnawed at them. Violence leaves chaos. Panic scatters. But the shoe had been tucked, hidden just enough to suggest intention. Someone had noticed it. Someone had bent down. That took seconds. Seconds that felt safe. Seconds taken by someone not worried about being seen. Someone who knew the rhythms of the alley, the blind spots, the times when footsteps echoed and when they didn't. For the first time, a detective asked the question no one had wanted to ask before. What if Eleanor was not attacked in the alley at all? What if the alley was a stage, not the crime scene? A place to discard a clue, to anchor the narrative there, to pull focus away from where control had truly been established. If that was true, then Eleanor might have entered the van willingly, somewhere earlier, somewhere cleaner. The alley would become a misdirection, and the investigation had taken the bait for years. That idea reframed everything. The CCTV of Eleanor walking with a man could have been the last genuine moment of freedom she had, a moment already under the influence of someone she trusted. The alley might have been used later, the shoe planted to suggest a struggle that never happened there. It was a risky move, but risk is relative when you understand the board. Hale's access routes were examined again with that lens. He had reason to be near Eleanor's building that night. A logged call-out for a faulty door sensor in a neighboring property. The job had been marked complete, but no tenant remembered reporting it. At the time, that discrepancy meant nothing. Now it pulsed. False call-outs were a known trick in other cases, a way to legitimize presence, to create paper where memory would later fail. Hale said the call came in late and was cancelled. There was no recording. The system had since been replaced. The case pressed against the limits of what could be done without crossing into obsession. Surveillance was increased. Hale noticed. He adjusted, took different routes, became even more careful. The kind of careful that suggested awareness. But awareness alone was not guilt. The line remained stubbornly intact. Then, quietly, the past offered one more fracture. A retired officer, clearing out his loft, found a notebook from his early years. He had worked briefly on Eleanor's case before transferring. The notebook contained rough sketches, half-formed thoughts, things never meant for reports. One entry mentioned a van sighting near the canal that night, reported by a jogger who had been dismissed as unreliable due to alcohol consumption. The jogger had described a white van, engine running, a man leaning against it, watching the water. No plate, no clear face. The officer had written, "Feels staged." Like waiting. The lead had gone nowhere and had been buried under stronger testimony. The jogger was found. Older now. Sober for years. His memory had faded, but the feeling had not. He remembered the man because he had smiled, casually, as if being watched didn't matter. That detail echoed the calm in the CCTV. The confidence of someone who did not fear interruption. It still wasn't enough. The Crown Prosecution Service reviewed the file and declined to proceed. Circumstantial. Pattern-based. Insufficient likelihood of conviction. The words landed like a door closing. Eleanor's parents were informed again, gently, that the case remained open but stalled. Open was a word that did too much work. It suggested possibility. It suggested hope. In reality, the investigation now lived in the margins, powered by a handful of people unwilling to let go. What haunted them most was not Hale himself, but the mechanism he represented. The idea that someone could exploit the architecture of trust so completely that even years later, the truth would refuse to solidify. That a woman could vanish not because the city failed to see her, but because it saw her exactly as expected and therefore did not look closer. As the years edged forward, the narrative outside hardened into folklore. A woman lost. A city unmoved. Inside the unit, the story was sharper, uglier. Eleanor Wright had not been unlucky. She had been selected, approached, and moved through London under the guise of normality. Her case was not a warning about dark alleys, but about well-lit ones. About men with keys and clipboards and reasons to be there. And somewhere in London, Martin Hale continued to live his life in full view, a man shaped like an answer that could never quite be spoken out loud, while Eleanor's absence pressed on the city like a bruise that never healed, darkening not with time, but with every realization of how close the truth had always been, and how easily it had been allowed to walk past without being stopped. The years after the Crown's refusal did not end the case, they hollowed it out. What remained was a shell carried by a handful of detectives who had learned the difference between official closure and personal surrender. Eleanor Wright's name stopped appearing in press briefings, stopped triggering reminders in internal systems, but it never stopped circulating in the low voices of those who knew exactly how wrong it still felt. Cold cases do not die. They sink, settling into the sediment of a department, waiting for pressure to change. Pressure came from somewhere unexpected. In 2011, a routine review of unsolved crimes along the canal corridor pulled Eleanor's file back onto a screen. The review wasn't focused on murder. It was focused on disappearances, on women who slipped out of routines and were never fully accounted for. Different years. Different burrows. Similar shapes. A late walk. A calm companion. No witnesses who could say they saw force. When the cases were layered, transparencies stacked one over the other, a faint alignment emerged. Routes intersected. Times overlapped. And threaded through more than one file was a familiar occupational detail: maintenance access, security work, keys. The review team resisted the temptation to jump to names. They focused on mechanics instead. How did people move? How did they gain compliance without noise? The answer was always the same. Authority, lightly worn. The confidence to speak first. The ability to create a reason where none was needed. Eleanor's case became the anchor, the reference point others were measured against. Not because it was solved, but because it wasn't. Because it refused to close despite the years stacked on top of it. Martin Hale's name surfaced again, not as a suspect, but as a variable. His employment history overlapped with 3 other locations tied loosely to the review. He had worked near them, not at the time of disappearance necessarily, but close enough to leave fingerprints in the form of access logs and callouts. Always explainable, always deniable. The pattern did not scream seriality. It murmured opportunity. Detectives debated whether they were building a narrative where none existed. That fear was constant. Cold cases distort perspective. They invite obsession. The only defense was discipline. So they broke Hale down into pieces, separating the man from the myth they were beginning to project onto him. They examined his finances. Boring. His relationships. Sparse. His digital footprint. Minimal. No trophies. No confessions hiding online. If he was guilty of anything, he had learned early not to externalize it. What unsettled them was how well he fit into the negative space of the crimes. He left no excess. No flourish. Just absence. They attempted a different tactic. Instead of chasing evidence from the past, they looked for leverage in the present. Hale was called in again, this time not to talk about Eleanor directly, but about his career. His movements. His routines. The interview was framed as administrative, a review of historical work practices. He relaxed into it, comfortable in territory he understood. He talked about systems, about how things used to be done before everything went digital, about how easy it was for records to be lost back then. He laughed when he said it, a small sound that landed badly in the room. At one point, an officer asked him, casually, how often he used the canal roads. Hale answered without thinking. All the time. They're quicker at night. He stopped, just for a fraction of a second, then added, used to be, anyway. It was nothing. Less than nothing. But it joined a growing constellation of moments where his ease betrayed familiarity that went beyond professional necessity. Still, no charges. Then, a mistake. Not a confession. Not a slip of the tongue. A complaint. A woman reported that Hale had followed her from a building site in East London. She noticed him because he stayed just far enough back to avoid confrontation, close enough to feel intentional. She ducked into a shop. He waited outside. When she confronted him, he smiled and said he thought she was someone else. She called the police anyway. This time, it was logged properly. This time, his name was already flagged in systems he did not know about. The incident itself amounted to nothing legally. No crime. No arrest. But it changed the calculus. Hale was no longer just a theoretical risk buried in old files. He was a present concern. Surveillance was authorized again, tighter now, justified not by Eleanor's case alone, but by accumulation. Detectives watched him move through the city with the same measured confidence he always had. They watched how he chose routes, how he avoided cameras without appearing to avoid them, how he seemed to sense when eyes were on him. They also watched how nothing happened. Weeks passed. Then months. Hale did not escalate. He did not make a mistake that could be caught. It was as if he knew the boundaries of attention and stayed just inside them. That restraint was its own kind of signature. Crimes of impulse burn hot. Crimes of control smolder. The frustration inside the unit grew corrosive. Some officers argued it was time to let go, to accept that Eleanor Wright's case would never move beyond inference. Others argued that letting go was exactly what someone like Hale relied on. Fatigue. Distraction. The assumption that time was a solvent rather than a preservative. Eleanor's parents aged further, their hope thinning into ritual. They attended anniversaries. They answered the same questions. They thanked the same detectives for not forgetting. They did not know how close the case hovered to accusation, how often Hale's name had been spoken behind closed doors, how many times it had been swallowed again because it could not be proven. What no one said out loud was the most dangerous possibility of all. That Hale might never be charged not because he was innocent, but because he had perfected a method that left the justice system permanently one step behind. That Eleanor's death was not an anomaly, but a lesson learned early, refined over time, executed with increasing precision. The review team compiled everything into a single internal document. No conclusions. No accusations. Just alignment. Timelines. Overlaps. Behavioral notes. They titled it carefully, avoiding language that could trigger legal alarms. It circulated quietly. It was read. It was argued over. It was never leaked. By the end of the year, Eleanor Wright's case occupied a strange limbo. Too active to be archived. Too weak to be prosecuted. A cold case warmed by suspicion but frozen by law. Martin Hale remained free, his life unremarkable on the surface, his presence in the city as normalized as traffic and rain. And that was the final cruelty of it. Eleanor's story had not ended with a body in a river or a shoe behind a skip. It had stretched forward, embedding itself into the present, shaping how detectives looked at routine, how they weighed trust, how they interpreted silence. The case taught them that some crimes are designed not to shock, but to endure. To exist in the space between what can be felt and what can be proven. As another year closed, Eleanor's name was spoken again in a quiet office, not as a victim to be mourned, but as a standard against which failure was measured. Somewhere in London, Martin Hale locked a door, checked a schedule, blended into the flow of ordinary life. And the city, as it always had, absorbed him without resistance, unaware that the distance between safety and disappearance could be as small as a conversation with the wrong man, spoken under a streetlight where nothing appears out of place at all. By the time the case crossed its 10th year, it had stopped being measured in dates and started being measured in fatigue. Not just the exhaustion of detectives, but the weariness of a system built to resolve things quickly and move on. Eleanor Wright's file resisted that rhythm. It sat there, neither alive nor dead, a constant reminder that time does not solve crimes, it only rearranges the obstacles around them. And somewhere within those obstacles, Martin Hale continued to move with the same quiet confidence he always had. What changed in year 11 was not evidence, but climate. Public trust in institutions had begun to erode across the city. Old cases were being reopened. Historical failures dragged back into the light. The word accountability gained weight. Cold case units found themselves under a different kind of pressure, encouraged to revisit what had once been deemed unprovable. Eleanor's case benefited from this shift not because it suddenly looked solvable, but because it now looked unacceptable to ignore. A new detective was assigned to the unit, younger, unburdened by the emotional sediment that coated the older files. He approached Eleanor's case with a dangerous advantage, no reverence. To him, the assumptions of the past were just that, assumptions. He didn't ask why things had stalled. He asked why they had ever been framed the way they were. The first thing he questioned was motive. For years, the working theory had hovered around opportunistic predation, a crime enabled by access and routine. But the absence of overt violence, the lack of panic, the careful disposal of evidence, these suggested something narrower. Not thrill. Not rage. Control. The need to orchestrate, to move another human being through space without resistance. That kind of crime often begins long before the night it culminates. So he went back further. Months before Eleanor disappeared. Weeks. Days. Eleanor's colleagues were contacted again, this time not with questions about relationships, but about interruptions. Repairs. Inspections. Unscheduled visits. One colleague remembered Eleanor complaining about a persistent issue with a door sensor in her building. It triggered alarms randomly. Maintenance had come out twice. Same man, she thought. She couldn't be sure. At the time, it was just an annoyance. Now it felt like a threat. Records confirmed that Martin Hale had attended the building for sensor-related issues in the weeks leading up to Eleanor's death. That alone meant nothing. But it introduced proximity before the night itself. It suggested recognition. Familiarity. A face that would not trigger fear if encountered after midnight. A voice she might answer if it spoke her name. The detective mapped Eleanor's movements over the preceding month. Gym visits. Grocery trips. Coffee stops. Patterns emerged. Not dramatic ones. Subtle shifts. She had started taking slightly different routes home, avoiding the tube some nights, walking more often. She mentioned to a friend that she liked the quiet, that it helped her think. There was no indication she felt threatened. But there was something else. A sense of being observed that she couldn't articulate, brushed off as imagination. That comment sat uneasily in the file. The detective then did something no one else had done. He walked Eleanor's routes at the same times, not as a reconstruction, but as an exercise in presence. He stood where she would have stood waiting to cross. He noted who lingered, who passed through repeatedly, who seemed to watch without staring. Maintenance vans came and went. Security uniforms blended into the background. People stepped aside for them instinctively. Authority creates blind spots. He wrote that down. Martin Hale's current employer was contacted under the guise of a routine audit. His performance reviews were unremarkable, dependable, quiet. No complaints recently. He was described as someone you don't have to think about. The phrase landed hard. That was exactly the problem. Surveillance resumed, but differently this time. Less about catching him doing something wrong, more about understanding how he existed in space. The detective noticed how Hale positioned himself near exits, how he chose seats in public places with clear sight lines, how he waited, how comfortable he was with stillness. This was not nervousness. It was patience. Then came the archive. A push to digitize older personnel records unearthed fragments that had once been inaccessible. Among them were internal notes from Hale's first maintenance job in the late 90s. A supervisor had written that Hale was technically proficient, but overstepped boundaries with tenants. The note was followed by a recommendation for additional training. No record of that training being completed. No follow-up. Hale moved companies soon after. The pattern repeated across employers. Boundary issues. Soft language. No formal action. Always just enough to raise an eyebrow, never enough to trigger consequence. The system had smoothed over each moment, sanding him down into something acceptable. The detective presented his findings to the unit. There was no smoking gun. There never was. But there was now a narrative with gravity. A man who inserted himself into lives under the cover of work. Who learned routines? Who waited? Who chose moments where compliance would feel easier than resistance? The question shifted from did he do it to how would he have done it? And that question, finally, had an answer that made sense. Eleanor would not have been abducted. She would have been redirected. A suggestion of a problem. A request to check something quickly. A reason that sounded urgent but harmless. Once she stepped closer, once she followed, the choice would narrow. Not through force, but through social pressure. Through the instinct not to make a scene. That instinct kills more quietly than violence ever could. The alley, in this version of events, was not where Eleanor lost control. It was where the illusion of randomness was planted. The shoe was not a byproduct of struggle. It was punctuation. A way to tell a story for the investigators, to send them down a path that led away from the truth. When this theory was put in front of prosecutors, the response was the same as always. Compelling. Insufficient. They needed something tangible. Something that could not be explained away as coincidence or conjecture. That something did not exist. But the climate had changed, and with it, the tolerance for doing nothing. Hale was called in once more, this time not as a witness, not as a person of interest, but as a man whose past had finally caught up with him. The interview room felt different. Less conversational. More deliberate. He noticed. His posture tightened. His answers slowed. The detective laid out the timeline. The access. The complaints. The overlaps. He did not accuse. He invited explanation. Hale listened. Smiled faintly. Said it was all circumstantial. Said people liked to connect dots after the fact. Said he had done nothing wrong. And then, just once, he said something he could not take back. She trusted me, he said, and then stopped. The room went still. The detective asked him who he meant. Hale blinked. Corrected himself. Said he meant tenants in general. People trusted him to do his job. He laughed it off. A slip. Nothing more. But the damage was done. Trust had entered the room uninvited. A word that had hovered over Eleanor's case for more than a decade, finally spoken aloud by the man who had denied knowing her at all. It was not a confession. It was not evidence. But it was a fracture. The interview ended without arrest, as all the others had. But when Hale walked out, something fundamental had shifted. The detectives were no longer asking whether he had done it. They were asking how long he had been doing it and how many times the city had looked directly at him and seen nothing but a man doing his job. Eleanor Wright's case did not crack open that day, but it groaned. The sound of pressure building, of a structure finally starting to fail. And in that sound was the promise of something dangerous, something overdue. The promise that hiding in plain sight only works until the moment someone decides to stop accepting the view they've been given and start interrogating why it was framed that way in the first place. The fracture left by that single sentence did not widen immediately. It sat there, thin and almost invisible, like a crack in glass you only notice when the light hits it just right. But once it existed, it changed how everything sounded. Every denial from Martin Hale now carried an echo. Every calm answer arrived a fraction too rehearsed. The word trust lingered in the interview room long after he left, heavy with implication, impossible to scrub out with transcripts and procedure. For the detectives who had lived with Eleanor Wright's case for years, it felt like standing at the edge of something that refused to reveal itself fully. They had always known what the case was about. Control, access, routine. Now they had heard the language of it slip, unguarded, from the man they had never been able to name out loud. It wasn't enough for an arrest. But it was enough to justify a shift from observation to pressure. Pressure does not always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like patience weaponized. They began by tightening the circle around Hale's past, not just professionally, but geographically. Where had he lived in 2003? Who lived near him? What routes connected his home to his work? The map filled in slowly, revealing a city within a city, one drawn not by streets, but by habit. Hale's movements formed loops. Predictable. Efficient. Designed to touch multiple points without drawing a straight line between them. One of those loops passed disturbingly close to Eleanor's flat. That fact had been noted before, dismissed as coincidence. Maintenance workers lived all over London. This time, it was examined differently. Hale's commute in 2003 would have taken him past Eleanor's street almost nightly. He would have seen the lights in her building. The rhythm of arrivals and departures. The way certain windows went dark at certain hours. Familiarity does not always require introduction. Sometimes it is built from observation alone. The cold case unit reached out again to Eleanor's social circle, this time asking a different question. Had anyone ever seen her speak to a maintenance worker? Had she ever mentioned someone checking something in her building late at night? Most answers were no. Then one friend hesitated. She remembered Eleanor mentioning a man who had helped her once when she was locked out. Late. Rainy. She hadn't felt unsafe, just embarrassed. She couldn't remember his name. She couldn't remember his face clearly. Only that he had been calm, professional, and oddly reassuring. That memory could not be dated precisely. It could not be corroborated, but it aligned too neatly to ignore. The detectives felt the case tipping into a dangerous territory, the kind where belief solidifies faster than evidence. They slowed themselves down deliberately, forcing every new thought through layers of skepticism. They had seen what obsession could do. They had seen cases destroyed by certainty that arrived too early. Eleanor deserved better than that. She deserved something that could stand. The breakthrough, when it came, did not announce itself as such. It arrived disguised as bureaucracy. An internal review of evidence handling practices from the early 2000s uncovered inconsistencies in how physical items had been logged and transferred between units. Most were mundane. Boxes mislabeled. Dates smudged. But one discrepancy stood out. Eleanor's shoe. The record showed it had been moved from the original evidence locker to a secondary storage facility for re-examination in late 2003. The officer who signed it out had never signed it back in. The shoe was returned, but the chain of custody contained a gap of nearly 6 hours. 6 hours no one had ever explained. The officer was traced. Retired. He remembered the day vaguely. He had been asked to deliver the shoe to a forensic lab for additional testing that never appeared in the file. He couldn't recall who made the request. He assumed it had been authorized. He returned the item as instructed. That was all. 6 hours was nothing legally. But in a case built on absence, it mattered. The forensic lab logs from that day were incomplete. Digital backups did not exist. Paper records had been purged years earlier. The shoe itself was examined again. New tests. New technology. Nothing conclusive. But the idea that the evidence might have been handled improperly added another layer of contamination to an already fragile case. Defense attorneys would tear it apart. Prosecutors knew this. They recoiled. Still, the unit pressed on. Hale was interviewed again, not formally, but indirectly. Former colleagues were contacted. Supervisors from long-defunct companies were found. One admitted, off the record, that Hale had been too interested in tenants' lives. Another said he had been warned more than once about staying too long on jobs, about unnecessary follow-ups. None of this had made it into official reports. No one wanted the paperwork. No one wanted the liability. The system had done what it always does. It had smoothed him out and passed him along. As pressure built, Hale began to change. Not dramatically. Subtly. He stopped taking certain routes. He altered his schedule. He grew more isolated. Surveillance noted longer periods of stillness inside his flat. Lights on late. Curtains half drawn. He was not running. He was waiting. Waiting for something to either happen or stop happening. Detectives debated the ethics of pushing harder without charges. How much attention was too much? How close could they get without crossing into harassment? The line was thin, and they knew it. Hale's life was being lived under a lens he could feel but not see. That awareness itself became part of the experiment. Would he crack? Would he confess? Or would he retreat further into the shell that had protected him for years? He did neither. Instead, he did something else. He filed a complaint. Hale contacted a solicitor and alleged police harassment, unfounded surveillance, repeated interviews without cause. The complaint was carefully worded, legally sound, and arrived with supporting documentation. Times, dates, names. He knew the system well enough to weaponize it. The unit was forced to justify its actions, to explain its interest, to articulate suspicion without naming it. For the first time, Eleanor Wright's case was formally placed in opposition to Martin Hale's rights. The review was tense, internal, political. Senior officers questioned whether the unit had gone too far chasing a theory that could not be proven. The word fixation appeared in a memo. That word cut deeper than any denial Hale had ever offered. Fixation was the accusation cold case detectives feared most. It suggested they had lost objectivity, that they had mistaken belief for truth. The unit pulled back, publicly at least. Surveillance was reduced. Interviews ceased. Hale's complaint was quietly closed without action, but the message was clear. The system was no longer willing to bend for Eleanor's absence. And yet, something had changed outside official channels. Whispers circulated. Among officers. Among former tenants. Among people who had crossed paths with Hale and never liked the feeling of it. The narrative, once confined to a file, began to leak into memory. Not as accusation, but as warning. A man who was always around. Always helpful. Always where he needed to be. That kind of story does not produce arrests. It produces distance. Hale noticed. He began to feel it in small ways. Conversations that ended early. Doors that closed more firmly. The subtle withdrawal of trust. It was the inverse of what he had relied on his entire life. For years, people had assumed he was safe because he looked safe. Now, something about him made people hesitate without knowing why. Eleanor Wright had not been forgotten after all. Her case had seeped into the city's subconscious, altering behavior in ways no verdict ever could. The detectives understood this was not justice. It was not even resolution. But it was something. A shift in gravity. A recalibration of who was watched and who was waved through. Eleanor's absence had finally changed the way the city looked at one of its own invisible figures. As the unit prepared to shelve the case once more, one of them stood in front of the timeline, staring at the moment Eleanor walked beside a man on a grainy screen. Calm, unaware, still moving forward. The thought landed with a dull weight. If Hale had done it, he had done it knowing that even if he were never named, the cost would not be zero. It would be this: a life lived under quiet suspicion, a presence no longer trusted. And if he had not done it, then the truth was even more disturbing. That someone else, equally adept at hiding in routine, had used the same blind spots and walked away completely untouched. Either way, Eleanor Wright remained the fulcrum. The woman whose disappearance had exposed how easily normality could be used as cover, how thin the line was between safety and silence. The case did not end with handcuffs or headlines. It lingered, unresolved but altered, leaving behind a city slightly more cautious, a system slightly more aware, and one man moving through London knowing, perhaps for the first time, that being invisible no longer meant being unseen. By the time the unit stepped back, the silence that followed felt unnatural. For years, Eleanor Wright's case had been a constant hum beneath their work, a low-frequency vibration that never quite went away. Now, officially, it was dormant again. No active surveillance. No interviews scheduled. No memos circulating with Martin Hale's name threaded through the margins. On paper, the system had done what it always did when certainty refused to arrive. It had closed its hands and called it restraint. But restraint does not erase momentum. It only pushes it underground. The first sign that the case was still moving came not from police, but from the city itself. A journalist, working on an unrelated investigation into regulatory failures in housing maintenance, stumbled into Eleanor's orbit without knowing it. She had been reviewing tenant complaints from the early 2000s, looking for patterns of neglect, intimidation, and unreported access violations. Names blurred together. Addresses overlapped. And then one name appeared too often in places it did not need to be. Martin Hale. She wasn't hunting a murderer. She was documenting how power operated quietly at the lowest levels of the city, how people with keys could shape lives without scrutiny. Hale became a footnote at first. A recurring technician. A presence. But as she dug deeper, she found the same soft language police had found years earlier. Made me uncomfortable. Stayed too long. Asked strange questions. Complaints that had been logged, softened, and forgotten. When she reached Eleanor Wright's name, it stopped being academic. The journalist requested access to public records related to Eleanor's disappearance. What she received was thin, sanitized, stripped of internal debate. Cold case summaries are designed to be inert. They tell you what happened without telling you how badly it failed. But she noticed what wasn't there. No discussion of access. No mention of maintenance routes. No acknowledgement that Eleanor's building had experienced repeated sensor faults shortly before her death. She began asking questions. At first, police stonewalled politely. Ongoing investigation. No comment. Respect for the family. Standard lines. But journalism does not move like law enforcement. It does not need proof to publish a question. It needs resonance. And Eleanor's story, reframed as a failure of systems rather than a random act of violence, had resonance in a city already angry about being overlooked. The first article did not name Hale. It didn't need to. It talked about invisible authority, about men with access, about how women disappear not just because someone attacks them, but because someone convinces them to comply. Eleanor became a symbol rather than a case. A woman who trusted the wrong structure, not just the wrong person. The response was immediate and volatile. Other journalists followed. Blogs, podcasts, amateur investigators. The internet did what it always does when official answers stall. It filled the vacuum. Timelines were rebuilt. CCTV stills circulated again, this time with annotations and speculation. Someone noticed the posture of the man walking beside Eleanor. Someone else compared it to footage of Hale years later. The comparisons were crude, scientifically meaningless, but emotionally persuasive. Suspicion leaked back into the public sphere, no longer controlled by procedure. Police watched this with unease. Public pressure can revive a case, but it can also poison it. Rumors harden into facts. Innocence becomes irrelevant. The unit debated intervening, correcting misinformation, but every correction risked confirming more than it denied. They chose silence. Silence, in this case, was not neutrality. It was containment. Hale noticed the shift before anyone told him. He stopped appearing in public-facing roles, requested internal assignments, took sick leave. His name began appearing online, not as an accusation, but as a suggestion. Look into this guy. Why was he always there? He never responded publicly. Silence was his shield now, just as routine had once been. Then something unexpected happened. Someone else spoke. A former maintenance worker, now living abroad, contacted a podcast producer anonymously. He claimed to have worked with Hale briefly in the early 2000s. He described him as meticulous, patient, and too interested in people. He said Hale had once joked about how easy it was to get someone to follow you if you sounded like you knew what you were doing. The joke had unsettled him at the time. Years later, it made his stomach turn. The story was secondhand, unverifiable, but it spread. The podcast episode went viral. Eleanor's name trended for the first time in years. Her parents were informed before they saw it online, a courtesy that did nothing to soften the blow. Hope surged again, dangerous and bright. They gave interviews they had sworn they were done giving. They spoke Eleanor's name into microphones with voices that had learned how to sound steady while breaking. Police were forced back into the conversation. An official statement was released. The case remained open. No suspects had been charged. Speculation was unhelpful. The words felt hollow even as they were read. Behind them, activity resumed quietly. Files reopened. Evidence re-examined not because something new had been found, but because the world was watching again. Prosecutors reviewed the case one more time, this time with an eye toward what could be framed rather than proven. They considered lesser charges. Misconduct. Stalking. Anything that could establish a legal record. Hale's complaint history was revisited. His recent behavior scrutinized. Nothing crossed the threshold. He remained just inside the law as he always had. But the pressure did something else. It shifted where the story lived. Eleanor Wright was no longer just a cold case. She was an indictment of how cities function, how trust is distributed unequally, how certain roles grant access without accountability. Her disappearance was now discussed alongside others, folded into a larger conversation about safety that did not end at streetlights or cameras. Hale's anonymity evaporated. Even without charges, his life contracted. He moved flats, changed jobs. The routines that had once protected him now exposed him. Every move was noticed, every change interpreted. He became cautious in ways that suggested fear, not of arrest, but of recognition. Being unseen had been his advantage. Now he was seen everywhere. For the detectives, this was a bitter victory. Public suspicion is not justice. It cannot replace a verdict. It cannot speak for Eleanor in the way a conviction could. But it altered the balance. It removed the insulation that had allowed someone to operate without consequence. And still, the central question remained unanswered. On the night Eleanor Wright left a party and stepped into a London street, did she already know the man who walked beside her? Had she trusted him because she recognized him, because he had helped her before, because his presence felt normal? Or had she simply been unlucky, caught by someone else entirely, someone equally skilled at blending into the city's background noise? The case, once again, hovered on the edge of resolution without crossing it. But this time, the edge was public. The uncertainty belonged to everyone. As the noise built, one detective returned alone to the alley, years later, long after it had been repainted and lit and made safer. He stood where the shoe had been found, watching people pass through without slowing. He thought about how many crimes rely not on darkness, but on assumption. On the belief that what looks ordinary must be harmless. Eleanor Wright had believed that. So had the city. And now, even without a verdict, that belief was broken. The case had fractured something fundamental. The idea that safety could be inferred from appearance alone. That trust could be automatic. That the most dangerous threats announce themselves loudly. Eleanor's story had done what the law could not. It had taught suspicion. And in that lesson, uncomfortable and unresolved, her presence lingered, reshaping the city's instincts long after her voice had been taken from it, leaving behind a question that no amount of attention could finally answer, but no amount of silence could ever again fully bury. The city tried to move on, but cities only pretend to forget. London absorbed Eleanor Wright's name the way it absorbs everything else, into brick, into rumor, into the quiet recalibration of how people look at one another in confined spaces. The headlines faded, the podcasts moved to new obsessions, but something had shifted beneath the surface, a low-grade unease that refused to dissipate. This was no longer just about a woman who vanished in 2003. It was about the uncomfortable realization that the machinery designed to protect could also conceal, that familiarity could be weaponized, that the most effective predators rarely look like threats. Inside the Metropolitan Police, the case existed in a strange half-life. Not active, not closed. A file that never quite returned to the shelf. Younger officers knew Eleanor's name not because they had worked the case, but because it had become shorthand, a cautionary reference murmured during briefings about access control and background checks. "Remember right," someone would say, and the room would understand what was implied without explanation. Years passed. Evidence aged. Memories thinned. But pressure does not always move forward. Sometimes it circles. In 2019, a routine audit of cold case evidence storage uncovered a discrepancy. A box misfiled under a similar case number. Inside were copies of documents believed to have been lost during an early reorganization, maintenance access logs, handwritten notes, internal correspondence that had never been digitized. Nothing dramatic at first glance. No confession. No hidden photograph. Just fragments. But fragments are dangerous. They invite reconstruction. One log stood out. A maintenance entry from the week of Eleanor's disappearance, signed by someone whose handwriting did not match the digital name attached to it. The signature read M. Hale, but the stroke pressure was uneven, hurried, unlike Hale's later personnel forms. It suggested something written quickly, perhaps after the fact. Perhaps by someone else. Or perhaps by Hale himself under different circumstances. The document alone proved nothing. But it reopened a door. A small team was assigned quietly. No press. No announcements. The goal was not resolution, but elimination, to finally rule out what could not be proven and isolate what remained. They retraced access routes with modern mapping tools, overlaying old CCTV positions with building schematics from the early 2000s. What had once been guesswork became geometry. They discovered that one camera, believed to have been malfunctioning the night Eleanor disappeared, had not failed completely. It had switched to a lower frame rate due to a firmware issue documented months later. The footage existed, but it was incomplete, blurred, overlooked. At the time, it had been dismissed as useless. Now, with improved enhancement software, it was reprocessed. What emerged was not clarity, but rhythm. A figure moved through the frame at intervals that matched maintenance patrol patterns, not pedestrian behavior. Pausing where someone with access would pause. Turning where someone familiar with the layout would turn. The timestamps aligned with the disputed log entry. The figure's face was never visible. But the movement was intimate and formed. Someone who knew where they were going without hesitation. The team hesitated. This was not evidence. It was interpretation. But interpretation is often where truth begins to surface. They revisited Hale's employment records, his training certifications, his transfers. A pattern emerged that had been invisible before. He had requested reassignment shortly after Eleanor's disappearance, citing stress. The request had been approved without question. No exit interview notes survived. At the time, it had been unremarkable. Now, it felt deliberate. An attempt was made to speak with Hale again. He declined. Through a solicitor, he cited previous cooperation and lack of new evidence. He was within his rights. The law, as always, stood firm on the side of procedure. But something else had changed. The tone. The patience. Hale was no longer the quiet man slipping beneath attention. He was aware of being watched. And awareness alters behavior. Surveillance, limited and lawful, was initiated. Nothing overt. No tale. Just observation of routines. Hale lived quietly. Worked contract jobs. Avoided social situations. He was careful. Too careful. As if restraint had become a lifestyle rather than a response. Then came the call no one expected. A woman in her 40s contacted police claiming to have information relevant to Eleanor Wright's disappearance. She had not come forward earlier, she said, because she had not understood what she had witnessed. Memory, she explained, is not a fixed record. It is a negotiation. And hers had taken years to settle. In 2003, she had lived in a building adjacent to Eleanor's. She recalled seeing Eleanor in conversation with a man near the service entrance on the night she vanished. At the time, it had not struck her as unusual. The man wore a uniform. He looked official. Eleanor did not appear distressed. The memory had filed itself away as irrelevant. But years later, after seeing Hale's photograph circulate online, something had clicked. The man's posture. The way he stood slightly too close while speaking. The uniform had not been police, she realized, but maintenance. The logo indistinct. The authority assumed. She could not be certain. Certainty is rare in memory. But she was willing to testify to what she remembered now. The team listened carefully. They asked no leading questions. They understood the fragility of delayed recollection. Still, the account aligned too neatly with everything else to ignore. Access. Familiarity. Compliance without force. Prosecutors reviewed the material. Again. This time, the conversation was different. Still cautious. Still aware of the risks. But no longer dismissive. They discussed the possibility of a charge not for murder, but for unlawful detention, if evidence could establish that Eleanor had been led somewhere under false pretenses. It was a narrow path. A legal tightrope. But it was a path. They needed one more thing. Something tangible. Something that could anchor interpretation to fact. It came from an unexpected place. During a renovation of the old building where Eleanor had lived, workers discovered an undocumented storage space behind a false wall in the basement. Inside were discarded items from decades past, tools, uniforms, personal effects left behind by successive tenants and staff. Among them, a maintenance jacket bearing an outdated logo. Inside the pocket, a key fob no longer in use. The fob was sent for analysis. It matched access logs from 2003. The chain was still fragile, but it was no longer hypothetical. News of the discovery leaked despite efforts to contain it. The city reacted with restrained anticipation, careful not to ignite hope too quickly. Eleanor's parents were informed privately. They listened in silence, the weight of 2 decades pressing into every word. Hope had learned to move slowly in them, carefully, as if afraid of being punished for returning too quickly. Hale was informed that investigators wished to speak with him again. This time, he agreed. The interview room was unchanged. Neutral. Controlled. But the dynamic was different. Hale was no longer the man answering questions out of convenience. He was the focus, whether named or not. He listened. He nodded. He denied. Calmly. Consistently. He did not react when Eleanor's name was spoken. Not visibly. But his breathing changed. Slightly. Enough to be noted. When asked about the jacket, he said he did not recognize it. When asked about the access log, he said records from that time were unreliable. When asked about the witness, he said memory was flawed. Everything he said was reasonable. Everything was defensible. And yet, when the interview ended, one detective wrote a single line in the case file. He behaves like someone who understands exactly how much he can say. That line would not hold up in court. But it captured the truth of the moment. The case had reached a threshold. Not resolution. Not justice. But exposure. The quiet mechanisms that had once protected anonymity were failing. The city was watching again. And this time, it was closer. Eleanor Wright's absence had shaped policy, behavior, suspicion. Now, at last, it was beginning to shape consequence. Whether that consequence would ever take the form of a conviction remained uncertain. But the trajectory had changed. The case was no longer frozen in 2003. It was moving, slowly, relentlessly, toward something that could no longer be ignored. By the time Part 10 began to take shape, no one inside the investigation dared to say the word end. They had learned that cases like Eleanor Wright's do not end cleanly. They erode. They narrow. They suffocate until only one explanation can still breathe, and even then, it rarely exhales in the form people expect. The machinery was moving now, but it moved with the caution of something that understood how easily momentum could collapse under its own weight. Hale walked out of the interview room that day unchanged in posture, unchanged in expression, but altered in trajectory. He was no longer simply a man adjacent to a crime. He was a fixed point around which everything else now rotated. The investigation stopped expanding outward and began tightening inward, compressing years of speculation into a single, uncomfortable focus. The legal teams argued late into nights lit by desk lamps and coffee rings. What could be charged? What could survive? What would crumble under cross-examination? Murder was still out of reach. There was no body, no forensic link that could withstand the first blow of a defense attorney's voice. But other statutes began to feel heavier. Abuse of position, deception, unlawful restraint. Crimes that did not require proof of death, only proof of control. Control was the word that kept returning. Eleanor Wright had not screamed. She had not fought. There was no evidence of struggle in the alley. That absence, once a void, now felt explanatory. If she believed she was complying with authority, with procedure, with something official, then resistance would never have occurred. The most effective crimes do not announce themselves as crimes. They arrive disguised as routine. Investigators began reconstructing Eleanor's final hours with forensic precision. Not emotionally, mechanically. Who she spoke to, who saw her, what routes she would normally take, what deviations mattered. They overlaid weather data, transit delays, crowd density. The city became a grid again, not a memory. One detail resurfaced with new weight. Eleanor had made a brief phone call shortly before she disappeared. At the time, it had been dismissed as irrelevant, a voicemail left for a friend, casual, unalarmed. Now it was replayed again and again, slowed, cleaned, filtered. There was background noise. Footsteps. A distant mechanical hum. The sound of a service door closing. She sounded calm. Calm became evidence. The defense would argue coincidence. The prosecution would argue context. Neither side could prove tone, but tone lingered in the minds of everyone who heard it. Calm suggested consent. Consent suggested deception. Hale's employment history was re-examined with brutal thoroughness. Every assignment, every building, every complaint, no matter how minor. Patterns emerged not of violence, but of proximity. He was always near transitions, near vulnerable moments, near people who lived alone, worked late, trusted systems. He did not force entry. He did not break rules overtly. He occupied gray zones and waited for people to step into them willingly. Psychological profilers were consulted, not to label, but to interpret behavior. They described a personality comfortable with patience, with delayed gratification, with invisibility. Someone who did not need chaos, only access. Someone who understood that authority is most powerful when it feels boring. Meanwhile, the press sensed something shifting. The language changed. Cold case revisited became case approaching resolution. Editors sharpened headlines carefully, wary of libel, hungry for conclusion. Hale's name appeared more often, sometimes followed by the word alleged, sometimes not. The city leaned forward, waiting. Eleanor's parents were invited to a private briefing. They sat across from people who had aged with their grief. Faces they recognized from years earlier, now lined, cautious. They were told that progress had been made, that charges were being considered, that nothing was guaranteed. They nodded, hands folded, eyes steady. Hope had become a disciplined emotion. It no longer rushed. Her mother asked one question. Did she know him? No one answered immediately. We believe she may have recognized him, a detective finally said. At least as someone she'd seen before. The answer landed heavily. Recognition, not familiarity. Trust, not intimacy. The idea that Eleanor had walked willingly toward her own erasure because the situation felt normal was almost unbearable. It reframed everything. The city, the building, the moment. As preparations for potential charges continued, Hale's behavior shifted again. He resigned from his current contract without explanation, sold personal items, began clearing storage units he had rented for years. All legal, all explainable. But to investigators, it felt like compression, the narrowing of a life preparing for impact. A search warrant was sought for one of those storage units. It was granted. Inside, there was nothing overtly incriminating. No trophies, no weapons, just the detritus of a transient existence. Tools, old uniforms, outdated access cards, and one notebook. The notebook contained schedules, not names, not addresses, patterns, buildings marked with symbols, time windows, routes. It could have belonged to any conscientious worker. It could also have belonged to someone cataloging opportunity. Interpretation again hovered dangerously close to speculation. But one page mattered. A date circled in ink. The night Eleanor disappeared. No explanation. No annotation. Just the circle. Hale claimed it was a work note. Routine. Meaningless. Prosecutors argued that meaning does not require explanation to exist. The decision to charge was not dramatic. It arrived quietly after weeks of internal debate. A single charge. Unlawful detention by deception. Narrow. Precise. Risky. It did not accuse Hale of killing Eleanor Wright. It accused him of taking her somewhere she did not intend to go, under false authority. The arrest was understated. No spectacle. No cameras. Just handcuffs in a corridor that smelled faintly of disinfectant and paper. Hale did not resist. He asked one question. Is this about her? No one answered. The city erupted anyway. Some called it justice delayed. Others called it cowardice. Commentators argued over whether the charge went far enough or not nearly far enough. But beneath the noise, something fundamental had occurred. The state had finally said you. In court, the narrative was fragile. Built from inference, behavior, context. The defense dismantled memory, attacked timelines, questioned motives. The witness from the adjacent building was scrutinized until her certainty visibly shook. The notebook was framed as obsessive professionalism. The jacket as coincidence. But the prosecution returned again and again to one idea. Access. Not violence. Not rage. Access. They argued that Eleanor Wright did not vanish randomly. She was guided. Redirected. That her calm voicemail was not evidence of safety, but of manipulation. That Hale's entire professional life had been designed to move through locked spaces unnoticed. That on one night in 2003, that ability intersected with a woman who trusted the wrong signal. The trial did not resolve everything. It could not. Too much time had passed. Too many shadows had lengthened. But it did something else. It forced the story into the light, not as mystery, but as method. When the jury deliberated, they did so knowing they were not being asked to explain Eleanor's death, only her disappearance. It was a narrow moral corridor, one that demanded restraint, not certainty. Outside, Eleanor's parents waited. They did not speak to reporters. They had said everything that could be said. Inside, Hale sat motionless, eyes forward, hands folded, a man who had built a life on not being noticed, now unable to disappear. Whatever the verdict would be, something irreversible had already happened. The city had named the shape of the threat it had ignored for so long. The ordinary. The official. The familiar. Eleanor Wright's absence had finally forced recognition. And recognition, once achieved, does not fade easily. It lingers.